hear me, just, holler and I'll holler back. I guess this is my opportunity to introduce this book to people who haven't seen it before. It's a book that's been a particular favorite of mine as I was writing it, and it has some very positive reactions from people who've had an advanced look at it. So I'll just read a short passage from it. But I'll have to describe it a little bit first in order for this to make sense. Julian Comstock is a post-apocalyptic novel, I guess you could say. It's a story, as the title suggests, a story of 22nd century America, which in my 22nd century includes Canada. This was a terrible thing to do, I know. I was ashamed of myself when they did it, but the story takes place in a North America that's essentially the premise is that everything bad that might happen in the 21st century has happened. I've taken all the worst case scenarios, all the worst case assumptions involving climate change and economic collapse and resource exhaustion, the end of oil, so-called peak oil. And I've made all the worst case assumptions, including the assumption that our attempts to deal with these things have been not only unsuccessful, but backward looking. What we end up with in that scenario is a world that's lost it's a vastly depopulated world. The population of the world is a fraction of what it is now, simply because that kind of world can't sustain the kind of population we have. It's a world that's been thrown back on, at best, Victorian technology. Some people call it a steampunk novel because that's the kind of technology that people are using. This sounds like a pretty dismal scenario, but it's actually not a dismal book. Some of the advanced reviews have called it terrifying, they've called it shocking, they've called it depressing, and they've called it very, very funny. sort of like my sex life in that. But it is oddly enough a lighthearted book. So if you've always been wondering why there isn't a lighthearted book about depressing dystopias, well, I'm here to fill that need. Julian Comstock in this scenario is the nephew of the reigning hereditary president of the United States. The United States, as I said, includes most of Canada. It's at war with the Dutch for the possession of Labrador, a war that's been going on for years. The reigning president is Declan Comstock. He's a psychopath and sees his young nephew Julian as a potential threat to his power. Julian has been sent to hide out in a rural Athabascan estate where he meets the narrator Adam Hazard. And in the course of attempting to dodge the draft and avoid being killed by his uncle, Adam and Julian have a series of adventures spanning the continent from Athabasca to Labrador to the presidential palace in what's now Central Park in New York City. Julian is not an ambitious potential ruler. He would do almost anything to avoid becoming president. His real ambition is to make a movie about the life of Charles Darwin, a musical. This is problematic because this America is ruled is in a sense of theocracy. There's an organization called the Dominion of Jesus Christ on Earth, which is not itself a church, but which regulates and licenses churches. So it has tremendous power and political power, which it exercises freely, and it's not fond of the story of Charles Darwin. But it's Julian's ambition to make a musical about the life of Charles Darwin. So what I would like to read from this is some of the funnier bits, I guess, given that it's halfway between Canada Day and Independence Day. The people in this book celebrate what they call the 4 universal Christian holidays. That's Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and Independence Day. So in honor of Independence Day, I'll read a little bit about this movie that Julian wants to make. So give me a moment. Page 3 here. Julian has been having a problem putting together his script for this movie. Julian is a very sober and serious guy, so he's consulted Adam and some of the other characters in the book for help. So Julian discovers there's not a whole lot of drama inherent in the story of Charles Darwin, so he asked people, what could I add to the story to make it more successful? And the answer he gets is beautiful women, songs, and pirates. So the script has finally been assembled for him, and I'll just read you a summary of the script. All right. We met on scheduled occasions, and Julian or Magnus Stepney often joined us, and within weeks we'd sketched out a completely new outline of the life and adventures of the great naturalist Charles Darwin, which I will briefly describe. This is actually funnier if you know something about the life of Charles Darwin, but just play along. Act 1 was called Homology, and it dealt with Darwin's youth. In this act, young Darwin meets the girl with whom he is destined to fall in love, his beautiful cousin Emma Wedgwood, and discovers he has a rival for her affections in the form of a young divinity student named Samuel Wilberforce. The two boys enter into a beetle collecting and interpreting competition sponsored by the local university, which is called Oxford, and Miss Wedgwood in a coy moment mentions that she'll save a kiss for the winner. Wilberforce then sings a song about bugs as specimens of the divine ordination of species, while Darwin retorts with musical observations on homology, that is, the physical similarities shared by insects of different species. Wilberforce, a ruthless and cunning conspirator, tries and fails to have Darwin disqualified from the contest on the grounds of blasphemy, but Oxford is deaf to his pleading. Darwin wins the contest, Wilberforce comes in a bitter second. Emma kisses Darwin chastely on the cheek. Darwin blushes, and a simmering Wilberforce vows ultimate vengeance. Act 2 was entitled Diversity, or An English Boy at Sea, and it covered Charles Darwin's exciting voyages around South America aboard the exploratory vessel Beagle. This is where Darwin makes some of his many observations about turtles and finches' beaks and such things, though we kept the scientific matter to a minimum so as not to strain the audience's attention, and enliven it with a scene involving a ferocious lion. Out of all these unusual experiences, Darwin begins to formulate his grand idea of the diversity of life and how it arises from the effects of time and circumstance on animal reproduction. He resolves to communicate that insight to the world, though he knows it won't be welcome in ecclesiastical circles. Back home, however, Wilberforce, now a junior bishop at Oxford and grimly determined to achieve even greater ecclesiastical power, has drawn on his family fortune and hired a gang of nautical pirates to hunt down the Beagle and sink her at sea. The act culminates in a closely fought battle in which young Darwin, flailing about on the foredeck with sword and pistol, speculates musically on the role of chance and fitness in determining the ultimate outcome of the conflict. The battle is bloody, but as in nature the fittest survive. Darwin, happily, is one of them. By the beginning of Act 3, called The Descent of Man, all England is caught up in a fierce religious controversy over Darwin's theories. Darwin has published a book about the origin of species, and Wilberforce, now Oxford's head bishop, has made a point of denouncing that work and ridiculing the author. He hopes by this strategy to create a conflict between Darwin and Emma Wedgwood, who have postponed their marriage under pressure from Emma's family, until Darwin's respectability